Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name is Morgan Ellsworth, previously a junior field reporter for WNYC in New York City. I've often joked that radio chose me more than I chose it. My voice has always carried well, and the microphone felt like an extension of my own curiosity. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that curiosity would lead me here, broadcasting desperate pleas from a world ravaged by a zombie infection. If you're picking up this transmission, you're tuning in to a grim reality that overshadowed every normal routine we once held dear. I'm speaking to you from an improvised studio in the belly of a decommissioned Coast Guard cutter. The roar of engines is a feeble comfort against the silence enveloping the planet. All around us, coastlines and cities lie in ruin. Now and then, we pass drifting boats or abandoned piers. Occasionally, on those piers, we glimpse the vacant stares of reanimated figures, people claimed by the hyper-evolved rabies virus that turned them into what the world now reluctantly calls zombies. This is my account, from the outbreak's earliest signs to the near-total collapse of modern civilization. Listen carefully, because every detail might help you survive. My career began innocently enough, covering neighborhood fairs, cultural events, and local politics. I thrived on capturing the sounds of New York. In those days, the city's ambient noise was part of its allure: honking cabs, street performers, distant construction. While I was chasing local stories, an old friend named Karen Lowe was tracking wildlife patterns in the remote corners of Colorado. Karen specialized in zoonotic diseases, always sounding the alarm about how easily pathogens could jump from animals to humans. When she called me one afternoon, her tone was unusually urgent. She insisted that something was off with the new rabies cases popping up in the local wildlife. The infection times were too short, the aggression too pronounced. I tried passing these concerns up the chain at WNYC, but bigger headlines dominated the day. It was an election year, and political drama was all anyone wanted to hear about. Karen's warnings remained just that: warnings. No one was paying real attention, not even me, though I felt an itch of unease growing in the back of my mind. Karen's data came from Colorado's wildlife reserves near the Rocky Mountains. She recorded bizarre behaviors in foxes and coyotes. They would lose any sense of caution around humans, stumbling into towns and biting indiscriminately. Standard rabies often caused fear of water and certain typical neurological symptoms. But these animals showed advanced mania and confusion within hours. Some were found wandering aimlessly on highways, practically fearless of trucks or cars. I remember reading Karen's reports in my cramped WNYC cubicle. She described how the infected animals, upon death, seemed to twitch for longer than normal. Post-mortem analysis showed that neural activity remained in certain brain regions, far beyond the point where typical rabies would leave the host unresponsive. These were more than academic notes. They were a red flag of something unnatural brewing. Even so, I chalked it up to an anomaly, maybe a local mutation that would burn out. Rabies has always been dangerous, but it rarely becomes an all-out apocalypse. Little did I know that nature was crafting an exception, and it would soon overshadow every single story on the wire. A flurry of local news items hinted at bigger trouble. Small newspapers in Montana ran articles about entire packs of raccoons attacking hikers near Billings. Ranchers in Wyoming reported horses foaming at the mouth, displaying uncharacteristic aggression. Each incident alone might have been dismissed as nature being unpredictable, but the pattern was there. In my downtime, I cross-referenced these stories, finding subtle mentions of drastically reduced incubation periods for rabies. Yet, mainstream media hadn't latched onto it. The world remained fixated on politics, celebrity gossip, and everything else that felt urgent, but truly was not. Then, like a lightning bolt, the first high-profile human case made headlines. Robert Polone, a rancher in Montana, His story would become the unfortunate milestone, marking the start of the world's tumble into chaos. Robert had been trying to corral livestock that displayed frenzied behavior, bellowing, pacing erratically, and charging fences. One of his horses, already foaming at the mouth, scratched him deep on the forearm. Within a single day, Robert fell ill, experiencing confusion and belligerence. Local clinics treated him with the usual rabies protocol, but nothing stopped his rapid deterioration. He experienced seizures, delirium, and collapsed. When he was declared deceased, hospital staff moved him to the morgue. Standard procedure. 2 hours later, a nurse heard a clattering noise. She discovered the body of Robert Pallone upright, stumbling around the morgue, eyes open, though glazed and unresponsive. Those initial medical notes were chilling. They described his vacant stare, the lack of a traditional heartbeat, the uncoordinated but purposeful movement. The term zombie flashed through everyone's minds, though no official dared say it on record. From that moment on, the internet began buzzing with rumors of a new strain of rabies that brought people back from clinical death. The word undead started circulating in hushed corners of social media, but official statements tried to downplay it. Once Robert Pallone's case hit every major network, the public woke up to the threat. News anchors used phrases like fast rabies, hyper-evolved rabies, and the undead infection. Politicians scrambled to release carefully worded statements. We're monitoring the situation, and there's no need for panic. The CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, launched an emergency task force, and the WHO, World Health Organization, echoed concerns worldwide. I was assigned by WNYC to cover local implications for New York. People worried about Central Park's abundant wildlife, or the stray dogs and cats that roamed alleyways. Animal shelters saw a spike in questions about vaccinations. For a moment, it felt like the city was collectively holding its breath, waiting to see if this terrifying new threat would stay in the distant west. It did not. The first major urban outbreak wasn't in Billings, but in Denver. Animals that carried the virus roamed the suburbs, biting pedestrians. People unaware of the infection's severity took only minimal precautions. Some didn't even seek immediate treatment after small scratches. Within days, a cluster of infected individuals appeared in Denver hospitals, each exhibiting mania, confusion, and a sudden shift into a comatose state, followed by reanimation. Panic flooded the streets. By then, everyone was using the dreaded word zombie. The notion of a real outbreak overshadowed comedic or fictional references. This was real. Denver didn't stand a chance. The emergency curfew came fast. Sirens howling through the streets as National Guard units rolled in, trying to lock down the city. Residents were told to stay indoors, to wait for help. But help was already too late. The infection spread faster than anyone could respond. It only took one infected person collapsing in a crowded grocery store or on a packed commuter bus. Minutes later, they'd reanimate. Eyes clouded, limbs twitching, jaw snapping. Panic would erupt, and in the chaos, 2, 3, maybe 5 more would be bitten or scratched before anyone realized what was happening. It was a chain reaction, each outbreak feeding the next, and the animals made it worse. Mice, rats, raccoons, silent carriers, slipping through alleys, crawling under fences, hiding in walls. Infected animals didn't wait for permission or panic. They were already everywhere, slipping through the cracks of a system that was never designed to hold the line. Before communications went dark, I managed to get one last interview with someone who understood exactly what we were dealing with, Dr. Isaac Lennox, a virologist at Columbia University. I'll never forget how calmly he explained it to me. Traditional rabies enters through a bite, works its way to the brain, causes fever, confusion, and eventually death. But this is something else entirely. Dr. Lennox called it a hyper-evolved strain. Unlike the original virus, this one didn't just target the nervous system. It replicated in the bloodstream. Fast. Incredibly fast. What used to take weeks now took hours, sometimes less. Once the brain was compromised, the host would collapse, and then something unnatural happened. Heart stopped, lungs still, but the body didn't stay still. Partial brain signals kept firing, enough to move the limbs, enough to open the eyes, enough to make the corpse stand up and hunt. The virus didn't just kill, it puppeteered, using leftover tissue, altered cells. He compared it to a parasite, like a fungus that takes control of an insect's body. But this time, it wasn't beetles or ants, it was humans and animals. The creatures it created, slow, yes, but driven, always moving, always searching. An endless hunger to bite, to scratch, to spread. That's all it needed. And what scared Dr. Lennox most wasn't just the infected people, it was the scale. Pets, strays, zoo animals, rats in the subway, bats in the attic. Every one of them could carry it. Every one of them could be the next outbreak. By the time symptoms show, he told me, it's already too late. Standard rabies shots didn't work. The mutation made them useless. Research labs around the world scrambled to find a solution, something, anything that could slow it down. But progress was agonizing. One day without a breakthrough meant thousands more infected. A week, entire cities lost. And as Dr. Lennox said those final words, I realized we weren't facing a disease anymore. We were facing an extinction engine. New York learned from Denver's example. The mayor declared a state of emergency early. The city ramped up quarantines for any suspected cases, adding sporadic screenings at major transport hubs, JFK, LaGuardia, Penn Station. Subway lines carried ominous warnings, telling riders to report any animal sightings on trains. The city's pulse felt like it had a tremor in it. In Midtown, I reported live from the steps of the main branch of the New York Public Library. Military vehicles patrolled Fifth Avenue, while staff inside the building barricaded windows. Tourists had mostly disappeared, replaced by anxious residents stocking up on groceries and medical supplies. WNYC tried its best to provide balanced coverage, yet fear sold, and every sensational detail made headlines. The phrase, "zombie outbreak," was repeated so often that it lost its initial shock value, replaced by resigned dread. Radio call-in shows went from lively banter about sports and politics to frantic questions about how to protect families. I fielded dozens of calls during my segments. Can the infected break through locked doors? Are face masks or gloves useful if you're around stray animals? Is any part of the city truly safe? I had no good answers. Experts pleaded for calm, but their voices were overshadowed by the chaos. I vividly recall the exact day Manhattan tipped into panic. The date is etched in my mind. A Thursday, early morning. I was grabbing an overpriced coffee near Times Square before heading to the studio when I heard distant shouting. A city sanitation truck screeched to a halt in the intersection, and the driver jumped out, yelling for everyone to clear the area. A wild dog, frothing at the mouth, darted under nearby parked cars. Within minutes, a small group of uniformed officers arrived, trying to corner the dog. It lunged, teeth bared, at anyone within reach. Pedestrians scattered, some slipping on the sidewalk in their rush to get away. A couple of officers managed to subdue the animal, but not before it bit one of them on the leg. The dog's rage was far beyond typical rabies mania. Even pinned and muzzled, it thrashed with terrifying intensity. As I stood on the sidewalk, microphone in one hand, phone in the other, I realized this was more than a freak event. Calls began flooding in about sightings of other aggressive animals, large and small, across Manhattan. Suddenly, it wasn't just one dog. It was multiple incidents at once. Stray cats in the Lower East Side, raccoons in Harlem, a small group of rats in a midtown subway station. By noon, rumors spread that a few humans, bitten or scratched, had experienced swift declines, some already rumored to have reanimated. The tension in the air felt overwhelming. The city initiated a quarantine of the Times Square area. Barricades and checkpoints popped up around 42nd Street. I tried to film a quick segment describing the blockade. The wind carried the sound of distant sirens, echoing off skyscrapers. Pedestrians who were once so confident in New York's invincibility looked lost. I recall stepping around discarded tourist pamphlets, trampled underfoot by the crowd's rush. Times Square's giant billboards flashed public service announcements, urging calm, as if digital neon words could quell an impending apocalypse. Back at the WNYC building on Varick Street, we realized normal broadcasting was no longer feasible. Our management decided to shift into an emergency format, relaying official statements from city officials and disease experts, interspersed with call-ins from residents describing what they saw. We turned a corner office into a supply depot, stacking bottled water, non-perishable food, and medical kits. Security guards at the building's entrance set up metal detectors and temperature checks. If anyone showed signs of the infection, feverish eyes, erratic behavior, they were turned away. I found myself sleeping in the office, curled up under my desk. Venturing home to my apartment in Brooklyn felt too risky. Subway lines were on partial shutdown. Station loudspeakers repeated vague instructions about limiting travel. The city that never slept seemed to be dozing off in fear, awakened only by sirens or frantic radio bulletins. Every few hours, I'd step into a recording booth with Sarah Klein, our scheduling manager, to air updates. Sarah's usual no-nonsense attitude had softened into palpable worry. We started hearing from local doctors who explained what little they knew. Animal control hotlines were overwhelmed. Fire department lines jammed. The city's 911 service struggled to triage emergencies, with calls describing everything from packs of feral dogs to neighbors attacking each other. It was a swirl of crisis, converging into a single unstoppable wave. Amid the chaos unfolding in New York, scattered bursts of breaking news poured in from across the country, each one painting a darker picture than the last. In Chicago, a local news broadcast reported an outbreak at the Lincoln Park Zoo. Multiple big cats, and even an elephant, began showing erratic, violent behavior. Zookeepers attempted a rushed evacuation, but at least one handler was bitten before containment failed. Down in Atlanta, the CDC launched emergency containment protocols, deploying teams in full hazmat gear. But the reports from inside the facility were grim. The virus had mutated again. Faster, deadlier, more transmissible. They were no longer trying to contain it. They were trying to survive it. On the West Coast, Los Angeles authorities cracked down on stray animals citywide. Animal control teams moved through alleyways and parks, rounding up carriers. It slowed the spread, temporarily. But hidden pockets of infection kept flaring up in neighborhood after neighborhood, like sparks before a wildfire. Then came the global headlines, each one more terrifying than the last. In London, panic erupted after infected foxes were seen roaming near Buckingham Palace. The mayor declared a full-scale crisis, and the city spiraled into lockdown within hours. In Tokyo, airport screenings had been rigorous. Every traveler, every bag, every symptom, scrutinized. But one infected person slipped through. Just one. Within days, the vibrant streets of Shibuya saw their first cluster of reanimations. And in Sydney, wildlife officials reported unprecedented aggression among local dingoes and feral cats. The animals weren't just infected, they were hunting. Human cases followed quickly, spreading through the outer suburbs like brushfire. It was no longer a series of isolated incidents. The zombie outbreak had gone global, and the world as we knew it was unraveling. We at WNYC tried to maintain a calm voice on air, but our composure wavered each time we heard about the virus slipping across borders, often hitchhiking on commercial flights or cargo ships. The infection soared to pandemic levels almost overnight. And at home in New York, we felt the pinch of that global meltdown. Within 2 weeks, life in Manhattan changed drastically. Rolling blackouts struck entire neighborhoods. Grocery stores quickly sold out of staples. Pharmacies locked down, leaving frantic people pounding on doors for medication. The National Guard set up scattered checkpoints at bridges and tunnels, but the volume of fleeing citizens made them practically pointless. Certain neighborhoods attempted self-governance. Local volunteer groups organized block patrols, boarding up storefronts. The local power grid began failing more often, cutting lights and shutting down escalators in subways. Hospitals overflowed, not just with infected but with everyday patients who could no longer access routine care. One evening, I took a call from Dr. Maria Alvarez, an ER physician at Mount Sinai. Her voice crackled through the line, describing hallways crowded with feverish people, many in advanced stages of the infection. She said the staff worked in shifts so long that some collapsed from exhaustion. A handful of infected individuals on gurneys reanimated unexpectedly, causing pandemonium. Security tried to restrain them without causing alarm, but panic swept through the wards, forcing staff to lock entire wings. She uttered words that still echo in my mind. "We can't help everyone. We're losing the city." Her line cut off shortly after. Then came a stillness, the quiet before a storm. For about a day, the city felt oddly subdued. Traffic jams cleared because most cars were abandoned on roadsides. Most businesses were shut, government services non-existent. People huddled in their homes or fled, leaving behind hollow streets filled with wind-blown debris and flickering neon signs that had no audience. The calmer neighborhoods implemented nightly curfews. Residents took shifts watching for infected. The undead, as the population grimly referred to them, appeared sporadically. Isolated, reanimated humans, stray animals prowling city blocks. Each infected host moved with that slow but purposeful shuffle, eyes glazed. They showed no recognition of their old identities. Now and then, a horrifying shriek would break the silence as a new victim discovered what lurked outside their barricade. We at WNYC continued to broadcast from our subterranean backup studio. The regular station floors had too many windows, making us vulnerable. With a few staff volunteers, I tried to keep a 24/7 news loop going. We played old announcements from city officials, over and over, telling people to remain indoors, to avoid contact with any animals, to immediately isolate anyone showing erratic behavior. But those official voices no longer came to the station. Government channels had gone dark. In the days that followed, we witnessed what might be described as the next phase: large-scale reanimations. Initially, reanimated individuals or animals were solitary or in small groups. But as more people succumbed, they began to band together, forming slow-moving hordes. If they spotted living targets, they lurched forward, arms outstretched, carrying the infection with them. I recall gazing out a barricaded window in the early morning, glimpsing across the street at a crowd of reanimated shapes. They shuffled aimlessly, occasionally bumping into cars or each other. Their skin showed patches of decay, yet they continued to move. One figure wore a once pristine business suit, tie half undone, eyes vacant. Another dragged a leg twisted at an impossible angle. It was a surreal glimpse of how quickly the civilized world had deteriorated. Our radio transmissions reached some listeners still tuned in. They called, describing massive gatherings of infected in places like Central Park, Union Square, and even along the Hudson River piers. Some described harrowing escapes from swarms that surged into their apartment complexes, climbing stairwells, rattling doorknobs. Whenever a locked door gave way, the infection spread. Many times, entire floors of a building were lost overnight. Eventually, these calls ceased. Lines went silent except for the occasional static-laden message from someone traveling by boat or helicopter. A repeating theme: "We're leaving the city. It's too dangerous." For a short while, the National Guard and some military units seemed poised to push back against the undead outbreak. Tanks rolled through certain avenues. Soldiers, wearing protective gear, scoured alleyways to clear out infected animals. Barbed wire fences popped up around iconic sites like Grand Central Terminal and the Javits Convention Center, turned into makeshift triage centers. But as the outbreak spread, these efforts stretched too thin. Soldiers themselves risked infection if a single bite or scratch broke through protective layers. Supply lines became chaotic. Fuel, ammunition, and basic provisions weren't reaching frontline units. Heavy artillery helped stem the tide in a few hot zones, but caused structural damage that collapsed buildings onto trapped civilians. The city's claustrophobic urban sprawl gave the undead a terrifying advantage, as they lurked in any dark corner. Finally, rumors circulated of a mass military retreat, focusing on defending only the highest priority sites. Some said it was the White House. Others claimed it was a hidden bunker system. From WNYC's vantage point, it looked like New York had been abandoned to its fate. With no official rescue in sight, we bunkered down in the station's basement. It had been reinforced years ago as a backup broadcast center. Thick walls, minimal windows, and just enough room to operate. We ran on a diesel generator. It powered the radios, the lights, and our link to whatever was left of the world. Everyone had a role. Security staff led small supply runs into nearby buildings, searching for food, medicine, or fuel. Our engineer, Jonas Reed, kept the generator and ventilation system running, and Sarah Klein and I stayed on the air, recording updates for anyone still listening. We slept in shifts. The corridors above us occasionally echoed with scraping noises, infected creatures wandering inside, drawn by the faint hum of electricity. To avoid detection, we muffled the sound of the generator with foam padding. Yet every day the city above felt less and less like it was ours. One evening, Jonas gathered us to explain the generator's upkeep. We had about 3 weeks' worth of diesel if we rationed wisely. After that, we'd be in the dark. We debated whether to try escaping the city. Some wanted to attempt crossing the Hudson River by boat. Others insisted on fortifying the basement. In the end, we chose a temporary middle ground. Stay put until our supply runs became impossible, and watch for any sign of an organized evacuation. I joined a supply run one morning. Our aim was to reach a small grocery store 3 blocks away, rumored to have leftover canned goods. Wearing thick protective clothing and carrying a basic radio, I followed Jonas and 2 others, Raymond and Alex, out a side door. The once thriving street was littered with abandoned vehicles and scattered trash. As we tiptoed forward, I noticed the distinct hush that had settled over the city. Wind rattled shattered windows, and a distant alarm blared sporadically. Halfway there, we spotted a group of reanimated figures. They moved slowly, but their sheer number made them a formidable obstacle. Jonas signaled for us to duck behind an overturned taxi. We watched them shuffle by, their limbs stiff, their clothes stained with who knows what. I recall holding my breath, in a metaphorical sense, reluctant to make any noise that could draw them to us. Once they passed, we darted to the grocery store entrance. The doors had been forced open. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered from a barely functioning backup system. Most shelves were empty, aside from a few dented cans. We grabbed whatever was left, some beans, a couple of soup cans, bottled juice. As we were leaving, a faint shuffling sound came from the rear stockroom. We froze. Jonas peered around the corner and jerked back. One reanimated figure, possibly a former store clerk, stood there, eyes unfocused. Its breathing was shallow, but it emitted low rasps. We backed away carefully, not wanting to engage. The figure took a few steps forward, arms twitching. We managed to slip out a side exit, quietly shutting the door behind us. On the walk back, an occasional moan echoed through the deserted buildings, reminding us how close danger lurked. At last, we slid into the basement entrance, hauling our meager bounty. It was enough food for a few more days, no small feat in a city starved of supplies. That night we ate silent meals, aware that each successful trip carried the risk of infection or worse. In our makeshift broadcast booth, I continued daily segments. The idea was to provide any new information, but real data was scarce. Instead, I filled the airwaves with stories of survival from scattered callers, gleaned from shortwave radio transmissions. Some described small pockets of humanity holding out in remote cabins or ships. Others repeated rumors of a cure that might be under development. Each fleeting call offered a glimmer of hope amid the gloom. From London, A BBC broadcaster reported that the River Thames was acting as a temporary barrier against the infected. He claimed the Tower of London had been converted into a fortress. In Sydney, a voice identifying as a local official described packs of infected animals, feral cats, dogs, even birds, sweeping through suburbs. Some neighbourhoods had sealed themselves off entirely. A ham radio operator in South Africa warned of infected wildlife roaming rural regions. Baboons, hyenas, even livestock, spreading the virus far beyond the cities. And from New Delhi, a volunteer group issued a brief transmission. Mass evacuations were underway, but no one knew if they were heading towards safety, or something worse. Each message reminded us the crisis was no longer local, nor even national. It was a global apocalypse. Amid the despair, the first flickers of hope emerged from rumour mills. According to certain reports, labs worldwide were exploring new rabies vaccines. Some labs had partial breakthroughs, a serum that slowed infection if administered immediately after exposure. The United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRID, was rumoured to be among the top contenders. We also heard talk of a specialised facility in Switzerland hidden in the Alps, working on immunotherapy. No one could confirm these rumours reliably. Communication lines were simply too fractured. One night, against all odds, I received a direct shortwave call from Karen Lowe, the wildlife veterinarian who first alerted me to this crisis. She sounded breathless but resolute. She confirmed she was working with a team near Fort Collins, Colorado, attempting to map the virus's genome. She mentioned partial success in creating an experimental vaccine that halted progression in lab animals if delivered within an hour of infection. But human trials remained out of reach because of the chaos. Karen's data hinted that even if the vaccine worked, reanimation could still occur unless it was administered almost immediately. Karen's final words were, "Don't give up, Morgan. Nature is brutal, but it adapts, and so must we." Her signal cut out, leaving me clutching the radio, my mind spinning with the possibility that the world wasn't entirely without options. Weeks into the crisis, power outages in Manhattan went from sporadic to permanent. Major utility companies simply couldn't maintain the grid under these conditions. The subway system shut down fully. The flicker of lights in skyscrapers disappeared, replaced by the faint glow of occasional fires or emergency lanterns. With no reliable electricity, the city's nights became a canvas of pure darkness. If you ventured out, you'd rely on flashlights or the pale moonlight, hoping not to alert the undead to your presence. We used our generator sparingly, mostly to power the broadcast equipment during scheduled transmissions. Battery-powered lamps dotted our bunker. Sometimes, from our vantage point, we saw flickers of light in distant high-rises, indicating other groups holding out. But each day, those lights grew fewer. My own family lived in New Jersey. Early in the outbreak, I asked them to leave for a rural area, but as the crisis spread, phone lines and internet connections went down, leaving me uncertain of their fate. Before the radio towers failed, my sister, Candace Ellsworth, a paramedic, sent me a brief text. "Evacuating Newark for the Pine Barrens. Wish me luck." After that, no more contact. In the still moments between broadcasts, I pictured them safe in some isolated cabin, far from the madness that consumed New York. Others at the station faced similar heartbreak. Sarah Klein spoke often of her teenage son, who'd been studying in Boston. She had no way to reach him except for random radio calls that rarely connected. Jonas Reed had an aging mother in a nursing home in Queens, an area rumored to have been hit especially hard. He tried to find someone with a vehicle to retrieve her, but was never able to secure safe passage. Each night, we silently acknowledged these losses, collectively pushing down our grief because the present demanded constant attention. Our basement sanctuary couldn't last forever. Food and water grew scarce, the generator's diesel even more so. Every supply run had become life-threatening. The streets teemed with the undead, now often in large clusters. Our building wasn't as secure as we'd hoped. Infected animals sometimes crept into side entrances, drawn by any sound or movement. Sleepless nights became the norm, with watchers posted at all hours. Eventually, a contact on shortwave radio mentioned a possible safe zone near Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. Allegedly, a few remnants of the National Guard were fortifying it. They invited uninfected survivors to join, promising a plan for broader evacuation. We debated making the journey. Crossing the city with the ever-growing hordes was a daunting risk, but staying put felt like slow defeat. In an on-air announcement, I laid out our choice. We can't continue broadcasting from this location indefinitely. Supplies are nearly gone, and the generator is failing. We've heard there's a refuge at Fort Hamilton. This might be our best chance at survival, and possibly linking up with research teams. If you're hearing this, and you can make the journey with relative safety, do so. If not, please barricade yourself in a secure area and remain hidden. We'll leave behind a looping message on this frequency, but eventually it may go dark. With that, we prepared to leave. Our radio booth, once a beacon, would become a ghost. We set out before dawn, when the undead seemed less active. Our plan: move through side streets, avoid major avenues, reach the Brooklyn Bridge, then proceed to Fort Hamilton. The group consisted of me, Jonas, Sarah, and 2 others. Emily Morales, an audio engineer, and Andre Powell, a security guard. Each of us carried a small backpack with essentials: food, water, a flashlight, a makeshift weapon. Navigating the city was surreal. Skyscrapers loomed dark and lifeless, windows broken. Trash fires here and there flickered in alleyways. Clusters of reanimated forms shuffled among wrecked vehicles. We made our way cautiously, sometimes waiting behind fallen billboards, while a group of undead ambled past. Every so often we'd see a scurry of movement, likely frightened animals or other survivors darting out of sight. 2 blocks from the bridge, we came upon a small group of living people who appeared just as startled to see us. They wore improvised armor, sports pads and duct-taped plates. Their leader, Harold, a former city sanitation worker, recognized me from WNYC. He said they'd lost their safe house after a horde broke in. They had heard rumors of a stronghold at Fort Hamilton too. We decided to join forces. The Brooklyn Bridge, once brimming with tourists snapping photos, lay eerily empty. The iconic arches and cables looked like a haunted monument. There were scattered vehicles, some with open doors, as if their occupants vanished abruptly. We proceeded in single file. Halfway across, we spotted movement near an abandoned SUV. A reanimated figure clad in a once bright coat jerked awake, possibly drawn by our footsteps. It dragged itself toward us, arms extended. Harold and Andre, armed with metal rods, subdued it before it could get too close. The scuffle made noise, so we rushed onward, worried we'd draw more. From the bridge, we had a panoramic view of the darkened city. Smoke rose in columns, especially near Midtown. Small points of light hinted at possible survivor enclaves. We pressed on into Brooklyn, forging ahead toward Fort Hamilton. When we arrived, we found the fort partially barricaded. Sandbags and chain-link fences stacked in multiple layers, with a single checkpoint guarded by a handful of exhausted National Guard soldiers. Their eyes flickered with wariness, scanning us for any sign of infection. We submitted to a basic screening: no bite marks, no scratches, normal vital signs. They waved us inside. Inside the perimeter, a patchwork community had formed. Tents of every color dotted the courtyard. Families huddled around portable heaters. Some military vehicles served as makeshift hospitals, with cots arranged in rows. The spirit felt tense but hopeful. It was the most organized environment we'd seen in weeks. A soldier named Lieutenant Aaron Wells took down our details. He explained that Fort Hamilton had limited resources, but was trying to coordinate with any remaining government outposts. They'd heard rumors of an exodus plan via the harbor, boats that might evacuate survivors to a less infected region. No one knew if that region actually existed. The lieutenant also warned us that roving hordes had been spotted a few miles away, possibly heading toward the fort. A corner of the fort was set aside as a command hub. Maps pinned to walls showed red circles marking massive outbreaks in Manhattan, Queens, and beyond. Scattered notes about possible strongholds in the New Jersey countryside and upstate New York. People scoured the radio frequencies, searching for any stable broadcasts. We offered our expertise. Jonas handled generator repairs. Sarah and I offered broadcasting experience. Emily helped with audio equipment, and Andre joined perimeter security. For a while, it seemed we might finally have a secure location to continue transmissions. I resumed broadcasting from a small, dusty office within the fort. We used a field radio to amplify the signal. This is Morgan Ellsworth, formerly of WNYC, reporting from Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn. We have a temporary safe zone here with the National Guard. If you are uninfected and can reach us safely, you may find refuge. Use extreme caution. The streets are not safe, and we have limited capacity. But lurking behind that cautious hope was the knowledge that the undead infection never stayed at bay for long. Within days of our arrival, the calm at Fort Hamilton cracked. Reports came in of infected dogs roaming the outskirts. Soldiers posted in watchtowers along the fort's boundary described seeing packs moving closer each evening. Residents feared that if an animal pack converged, it could breach the defenses. The virus thrived in these animals, making them formidable foes. On the third night, someone sounded an alarm. An entire pack of reanimated strays surged toward a weakened section of fence. They slammed into the chain-link barrier, snarling and snapping with unnatural resolve. National Guard troops responded with a hail of bullets, but each shot risked drawing more infected to the noise. The lights revealed more shapes emerging from dark corners. The assault lasted until dawn. By the time it ended, the fence was barely holding, and we had lost precious ammunition. I helped some medics gather supplies from the makeshift infirmary. The scene outside the walls, illuminated by the first light of morning, was ghastly. Several dogs lay motionless, while at least 2 had reanimated yet again, twisted in unnatural poses. Soldiers shot them a second time, ensuring no further threat. The tension in the fort reached a new level, with people questioning how long the perimeter could truly stand against both infected humans and animals. During a shortwave monitoring session, Sarah Klein picked up a coded message from a medical team in Baltimore. The transmission said they had developed a partial immunotherapy that significantly slowed the hyper-evolved rabies infection if administered early. They were desperately seeking uninfected doctors, virologists, or nurses to help refine the treatment. The message repeated coordinates near the Baltimore harbor. Lieutenant Wells listened and decided Baltimore might offer a more robust safe zone. The fort lacked resources to push real research efforts. If the rumors were true, Baltimore might be our best chance at a medical breakthrough. The biggest question, how to get there. A plan formed to load essential personnel and volunteers onto transport vehicles. We had a few operational trucks and an old school bus. The final goal, reach Baltimore before the massive horde sweeping down from the north overwhelmed us. Civilians who chose to remain would continue fortifying the fort. But the soldier in charge of the convoy insisted that anyone with medical or technical expertise join the move to Baltimore, as that city's lab needed every skill set possible. I had a choice. Stay in a slightly fortified environment, or gamble on a dangerous road trip to a rumored sanctuary. I opted to join the convoy. My broadcast skills might be needed to communicate with other survivors or call for help. Jonas and Sarah also signed on, along with Emily. Andre, feeling a sense of responsibility to the folks at Fort Hamilton, chose to remain behind as part of the security detail. We parted ways with heavy hearts, unsure if we would see each other again. We rolled out early, just after dawn, in a ragtag convoy, 2 military trucks, a battered school bus, and a civilian SUV. Lieutenant Wells took the lead, scanning the road ahead through binoculars. We stuck to back roads, avoiding the highways. They were either jammed with wrecks or crawling with the undead. Crossing into Staten Island, we passed through charred neighborhoods, smoke still clinging to the air. At one point, we spotted an infected deer wandering down a quiet street, stepping over broken furniture and glass. We gave it wide berth and kept moving. In New Jersey, the roads opened up, but only slightly. Gas stations were looted. Some burned to the ground. Every mile carried the weight of danger. When we stopped, soldiers would form a tight perimeter, while others siphoned fuel from abandoned cars. MREs were rationed. We barely spoke. Everyone watched the horizon, waiting for the slow, unmistakable shuffle of the infected. During short stops, we picked up faint radio signals from scattered survivor enclaves. Some described vigilante groups holding small towns. Others spoke of farmland barricades. None sounded stable enough to rival the rumored Baltimore facility. We pressed on. The outskirts of Baltimore presented a bleak urban expanse, dotted with collapsed buildings. Smoke lingered in the distance, hinting at ongoing conflicts. Lieutenant Wells radioed ahead, hoping to contact the medical team. A crackly voice replied, guiding us to a specific cordon zone near the harbor. At last, we arrived at a perimeter guarded by a ragtag mix of civilians, volunteers, and a few uniformed personnel. The walls were made of shipping containers, stacked 2 or 3 high, reinforced with barbed wire and scrap metal. We recognized the hallmark of improvised fortress design, an approach many other enclaves had tried. This time, it seemed more organized, with actual guard posts and watchtowers made of scaffolding. They let us inside after a short screening, similar to what we'd seen at Fort Hamilton. Our convoy parked in a loading area. A tired-looking official directed us to a makeshift field hospital in a warehouse by the water. Inside the warehouse, cots and tents formed a makeshift medical ward. Generators powered a few refrigerators storing precious vials of experimental serum. Dr. Helena Cho, a leading researcher, greeted us with brisk efficiency. She explained that her team had refined a partial immunotherapy derived from existing rabies vaccines. Administered shortly after exposure, it slowed the virus's takeover, buying crucial time. But it was not a cure. The bigger problem, advanced stages of infection, were still irreversible. The atmosphere in the warehouse was a blend of desperation and determination. There were nurses tending to recently bitten patients, hooking them up to IV drips of the experimental serum. In the corner, a small lab area had microscopes and centrifuges humming, powered by a fragile electrical system. Dr. Cho said they needed more specialized equipment from a real pharmaceutical facility, but such places were often overrun or inaccessible. Lieutenant Wells organized security patrols around the perimeter. I volunteered to help with communications. Jonas offered to assist with generator upkeep, a skill honed during our time in Manhattan's basement. Sarah found a role coordinating new arrivals. Emily, with her audio engineering background, rigged a broadcast setup so we could transmit from Baltimore out to any potential survivors. For a while, it almost felt normal. There was structure, purpose, people working together towards something bigger than survival. But just beyond the container walls, the undead still wandered. We settled into a daily rhythm. Morning patrols swept the perimeter, checking for breaches or signs of movement. Medical checks came next. Dr. Cho's team monitored anyone with suspicious symptoms and administered the serum to recent bite victims. Scavenging teams left in pairs, heading into the ruins for food, medicine, and anything the lab might need. In the afternoon, I took to the airwaves, broadcasting updates, calling out to any medical professionals still listening, letting the world know we were still here. At night, the camp dimmed to near darkness. We used only what light we needed. Guards stood watch in silence, eyes fixed on the shadows. And though the city around us groaned and echoed with distant moans and the occasional crack of gunfire, there were moments, brief, fragile moments, when it almost felt like a real community. Quiet voices around fire pits, a shared meal, the sound of someone humming a half-remembered song. Survivors trickled in from other cities, bringing tales of massive hordes migrating south. Once an area's food sources were depleted, these reanimated masses drifted en masse, following noise, movement, or the distant scent of the living. The threat of tens of thousands of undead converging on Baltimore loomed large. Watchtower scouts reported silhouettes on the horizon at night. The largest group by far approached from the direction of Philadelphia, rumored to be a nearly abandoned metropolis overrun with infected. Our fortress might hold off small or medium swarms, but not an endless tide of the undead. Lieutenant Wells and Dr. Cho met daily with other leaders, debating evacuation strategies. In an attempt to bolster defenses, volunteers welded steel plates to the shipping containers. Booby traps were set along key entry points, a combination of spiked barriers and noise lures intended to draw small groups away. The tension rose. A single mistake could expose the safe zone. Meanwhile, Dr. Cho's lab progressed slowly. Every day, she tested new formulations. Each time, she hoped for a breakthrough that might fully prevent reanimation. One particularly dark night, we got our first taste of a large incursion. Scouts spotted a surge of undead at the far edge of the city. The alarm went up around midnight. Guards scrambled to man the battlements. People hustled to secure their tents and gather inside sturdier structures. The swarm of reanimated figures, perhaps several hundred strong, moved like a grim wave against the container walls. Spotlights danced across the horde, revealing rows of vacant eyes and decaying bodies. Defenders opened fire, but each shot threatened to draw more infected. Crossbows and improvised melee weapons were preferred, but they required dangerously close encounters. Traps along the perimeter thinned the swarm somewhat, but the unstoppable press of bodies continued. From my vantage point near the broadcast station, I could see silhouettes climbing over piles of their own kind. Soldiers yelled orders, trying to rotate fatigued fighters. Dr. Cho's team secured the immunotherapy vials, preparing to evacuate them if the walls fell. By dawn, the onslaught had subsided, leaving battered defenses and a safe zone that survived, but just barely. The reality was clear. If an even bigger horde hit, our fortress might not hold. In the wake of that bloody night, rumors began circulating of an operational Coast Guard cutter moored at the harbor. A small contingent of surviving Coast Guard personnel claimed they could operate the vessel. It would provide a mobile refuge. Water might serve as a natural barrier against the undead, though nobody knew for sure if reanimated creatures could somehow drift or float. A plan emerged. Dr. Cho and her core research team would board the cutter with the immunotherapy vials, continuing work at sea. A portion of the fortress population would join them, while others might remain behind, hoping to hold the perimeter. Sarah and Jonas decided they could continue supporting the laboratory's electrical and communication needs, even on a vessel. I volunteered to keep broadcasting from the cutter's radio room, extending our signal along the coastline. The biggest hurdle, fueling the ship and making a break for open water without being swarmed by the undead. Loading up was a frantic operation. Crews transferred crates of medical gear, food, and personal belongings to the ship. Volunteers formed a defensive ring around the dock. The swarm from the previous night had scattered, but stragglers lurked in the city's ruins. Just as the final crate was loaded, watchers reported new clusters of undead converging again. They approached from multiple streets, shambling relentlessly toward the harbor. The container walls wouldn't protect us at the dock. In a tense race against time, we unmoored the cutter. The engines roared, blasting thick smoke into the air. Some defenders stayed behind to buy us precious minutes with covering fire. I caught a glimpse of them on the pier, valiantly holding the line as the undead advanced. Their fate remains unknown, but their sacrifice allowed us to push away from the dock and break into the harbor. The Coast Guard cutter, USCGC Sparrow, carried about 50 souls, researchers, soldiers, and civilians. Dr. Cho's lab equipment was stacked precariously in a converted cargo hold. Jonas managed to keep the generators and communication gear running. Sarah took charge of the makeshift medical ward. I set up a small radio booth in a cramped cabin, continuing our transmissions under the call sign Sparrow 1. Sailing away from the infected city brought a sense of relief, but no one smiled. The silence on deck spoke louder than words. We'd left people behind, not knowing if they'd survive. And the ocean, vast as it was, offered no guarantee of safety. Supplies were limited, fuel, food, clean water, all finite. And the virus, it had proven time and again that it could find a way. Even out here, we couldn't let our guard down. From the ship's radio room, we scanned frequencies daily, searching for voices, for signs of life. What we heard painted a grim picture. In Europe, entire nations had declared martial law. Populations were abandoning cities for the countryside, reversing a trend generations in the making. Across Asia, massive evacuations emptied cities like Shanghai, Mumbai, and Jakarta. But reports said the countryside wasn't much safer. The infected, human and animal, roamed freely. From Africa, heartbreaking messages described infected wildlife overrunning game reserves. Predators and prey alike were spreading the virus. And in South America, a transmission from deep in the Amazon spoke of infected jungle creatures stalking remote villages, dragging the infection deeper into untouched regions. I relayed each of these updates over open channels. Most days, there was no reply. But every now and then, a voice would answer. Someone drifting off the coast of Florida, surviving on a yacht. A small group near Vancouver Island, building a fortified camp from salvaged lumber. The infection knew no borders, but neither did the will to survive. The Sparrow's crew debated our next destination. Fuel was a major concern. We had enough to cruise for a few more weeks at low speed, but eventually, we'd need to dock or refuel from another ship. Some proposed sailing south to warmer waters and quieter ports. Dr. Cho, however, insisted on finding a stable land-based research facility to continue her work. She believed a fully equipped laboratory might turn the partial immunotherapy into a real cure. Lieutenant Wells had contacts who'd hinted at a secure naval base further down the coast, though it was unconfirmed. In truth, no perfect refuge existed. Every safe harbor had to be tested. Our maps showed multiple potential stops, but each carried its own risk of infection ashore. Meanwhile, rumors of a massive horde migrating down the east coast spurred us to keep moving. If that horde reached the coastline in large numbers, even docking for supplies might become impossible. Life aboard the cutter tested our endurance. The cramped space forced us to share cabins with minimal privacy. Food rationing was strict, mostly MREs or whatever we'd salvaged from Baltimore's stores. Fresh water came from the ship's desalination unit, but we had to keep it running with minimal power. Late-night shifts on deck included scanning for any drifting debris or the possibility of small, infected animals in the water. Dr. Cho's lab area was a constant hum of activity. She and her staff tested new chemical formulas, hoping for a stable vaccine that could be administered even after a few hours of exposure. Every so often, I'd hear cautious excitement if a trial on lab mice showed promise. Yet each time, the virus found a way to outmaneuver them. The reanimation aspect posed a complex puzzle. How to stop the host from rising again after clinical death. Despite the grim backdrop, small acts of kindness and camaraderie blossomed. People shared stories of their former lives, comforting one another. Some nights, a guard might pick up a guitar, quietly strumming a melody that reminded us of days gone by. In a sense, the apocalypse stripped away many superficial barriers. We were all in the same struggle, side by side. As days turned into weeks, the emotional strain became intense. Disconnected from any stable sense of home, overshadowed by a zombie apocalypse of unimaginable scale, many among us felt the weight. Arguments broke out over small issues like ration portions or who got a bunk near the vent. Tensions flared, only to subside into remorse as everyone realized we relied on each other for survival. I kept a daily audio log, partly out of habit as a reporter and partly to maintain sanity. In it, I described the ocean's expanse and the quiet horror of passing abandoned ships, sometimes with no signs of life, nor any signs of undead, just emptiness. That emptiness could be just as unsettling as hordes of reanimated creatures on land. We tried a few shore excursions for fuel or supplies. Each time we approached quietly, sending a small armed team in a dinghy. One such stop near a coastal town in Virginia revealed a deserted marina. Our team ventured onto the pier, rummaging through fuel tanks and local shops. They brought back a meager haul, some canned goods, a half-filled barrel of diesel, a box of medical gauze. But the second they explored further inland, they encountered infected deer and humans. Forced to retreat, they only narrowly avoided a swarm that emerged from a derelict gas station. These forays reminded us, nowhere on land was truly safe. Even small towns harbored hidden pockets of infection. The speed of the outbreak had spared no place. Each stop was a calculated gamble. In a rare stroke of luck, we picked up a signal from another vessel, a fishing trawler, the Sea Star. Its captain, Adrian Forsyth, claimed to be part of a small flotilla of survivors drifting along the eastern seaboard. They used fishing nets to supplement food supplies. The flotilla had around 4 boats, each with its own small community, cooperating to maintain radio contact and trade resources. We arranged a rendezvous off the coast of the Outer Banks. The Sea Star's radio crackled as we approached a calm stretch of water, the sun barely visible through a haze. 2 other ships bobbed in the distance, battered but afloat. A sense of cautious optimism filled the deck. We might have found others who'd carved out a new way of living amidst the undead apocalypse. When we met, we exchanged hand signals before docking hull to hull, bridging the gap with planks. Captain Forsyth, a bearded man with a determined gaze, welcomed us aboard the Sea Star. He described how they used fishing to stay fed, rotating among certain fertile fishing spots. They'd run aground in a few places, each time narrowly evading infected. Forsyth's main issue was medical. 2 members of his crew had minor injuries that risked infection if they ever encountered carriers. Dr. Cho inspected them, relieved to see no active virus present. In turn, we told him about the partial immunotherapy. Forsyth's eyes lit up, seeing a chance for his people if they were ever scratched or bitten. He offered fish in exchange. It felt like a mini barter system. The next day, we organized a communal gathering on the Sparrow's deck. Crews from the various boats shared a meal of grilled fish and leftover canned vegetables. Simple as it was, it felt almost festive, a momentary respite in a nightmare-ridden world. In quiet discussions, we debated forming a larger flotilla. The advantage lay in mutual defense at sea, but the more ships we had, the more supplies we'd need. The undead couldn't swim well, at least, not to our knowledge. Even if they fell into the water, currents might scatter them. Still, land supplies, fuel, medicine, specialized equipment were crucial for Dr. Cho's research. Some argued we had to keep searching for a true laboratory site. Others felt drifting at sea indefinitely was safer. We left the conversation unresolved, each captain returning to their ship with a pensive expression. One starlit evening, as we drifted near the flotilla, our receiver picked up a strong broadcast. A voice identified itself as Colonel Davis of the U.S. Air Force, speaking from a remote facility in the Midwest. He called for any operational labs or medical teams to coordinate with them. The words airlift capacity caught Dr. Cho's attention. If they truly had planes, they could move her research equipment to a real lab somewhere secure, if such a place existed. Colonel Davis mentioned a coded approach to ensure the location wouldn't be compromised by infected masses. He asked for coordinates and skill sets of any responding group. We hesitated. Could this be genuine help? Or a trap? In an apocalypse, trust is rare. Yet Dr. Cho insisted we respond, seeing this as our best shot to expand her work. To link up with Colonel Davis, we'd have to leave the flotilla and travel inland. The idea of returning to land unsettled many on the Sparrow. After experiencing the relative calm of open water, the notion of encountering hordes again seemed nightmarish. But if Dr. Cho's partial immunotherapy was ever to become a global solution, we needed advanced lab facilities. A long debate broke out among the crew. One side argued we needed to head inland, find a proper research facility, maybe near a working Air Force base. If we were ever going to stop the virus, we needed real labs, real equipment. The others weren't so sure. They believed the sea was our last safe haven. Land meant cities, roads, and the undead. Even a fortified base could fall. Out here, at least, we could see danger coming. I found myself torn. As a broadcaster, a chance to connect with a larger operation felt vital. If we helped coordinate a real solution, maybe we could save countless lives. On the other hand, safety was not guaranteed. We decided to carefully approach the coastline again, listening for Colonel Davis's directions. Following Colonel Davis's instructions, we navigated to a small coastal town where the Air Force allegedly had a landing strip for cargo planes. The harbor looked deserted from a distance. We anchored offshore, sending a scouting party to confirm conditions. They found minimal signs of undead in the immediate area, but discovered a barricaded store where a group of survivors had hunkered down. Those survivors, led by Marjorie Frey, had heard Colonel Davis's broadcasts but couldn't confirm them. They lacked transportation to the rumored airstrip. They pleaded to join us if we found a secure path. Some were children, malnourished and frightened. Our hearts went out to them. Dr. Cho and Sarah offered basic medical care, distributing water and rations. Marjorie explained that they'd survived by barricading themselves away from roving infected packs, but their supplies were almost gone. From the store, it was a precarious drive along half-broken roads to a small airfield. We arrived near dusk, with makeshift barricades and a few abandoned vehicles marking the perimeter. In the distance, a cargo plane stood on a runway, engines silent. We approached slowly, weapons drawn. Suddenly, a searchlight flared, illuminating our convoy. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Identify yourselves." Lieutenant Wells stepped forward, listing our group's composition. A medical research team, a handful of civilians and survivors. The searchlight flickered, then guided us forward. We found Colonel Davis with a group of Air Force personnel, surprisingly well organized. They had a few Humvees, portable floodlights, and a large supply of MREs. Davis explained they were ferrying survivors to a hidden fortress in the Midwest, hoping to consolidate resources. Colonel Davis said they could only take a limited number of people per flight. They wanted essential personnel first: medical staff, engineers, anyone who could contribute to a sustainable settlement. Dr. Cho's research was of high interest. The rest would have to wait for subsequent flights if there were enough resources. This created immediate tension among our group. Who would go first? What if the colonel's settlement was overrun or not real? Just as we debated, a soldier ran over with alarming news. A large horde of undead had been spotted north of the airfield. The region wasn't as clear as Colonel Davis thought. With nightfall approaching, the horde could arrive soon. The cargo plane could carry about 30 passengers plus cargo. That meant not everyone could evacuate before the horde arrived. A frantic scramble followed. People loaded supplies onto the plane. Dr. Cho's crates of immunotherapy vials took priority, along with her core team. Colonel Davis demanded we move quickly, as they couldn't risk the plane being swarmed. Our hearts sank at the idea of leaving others behind. In the chaos, gunshots rang out at the perimeter. The undead were closer than expected, drawn by the sounds of the generator powering lights. A few reanimated figures appeared near the fence, arms reaching through gaps in the wire. Soldiers fired short bursts, trying to minimize noise while still neutralizing threats. Inside the cargo hold of the plane, Colonel Davis repeated that time was up. The engines rumbled. Dr. Cho ushered in her core staff, Jonas among them. Sarah, too, was designated essential because of her organizational skills. The colonel suggested I join as well, given my role in spreading information and coordinating broadcasts. But what of Marjorie's group, or the many other survivors waiting on the tarmac? Lieutenant Wells looked torn, wanting to secure seats for his soldiers. The colonel remained firm. "We can't overload the plane. Another flight can come back if we clear the runway and survive the horde." Emotions ran high. Pleas to be included rose from the crowd. The first plane's engines built to a deafening crescendo, forcing everyone to make a snap decision. I resolved to board. Understanding my broadcast skills might help more people in the long run. The guilt weighed heavily. I knew the plane wasn't large enough for everyone. As I climbed the ramp, I saw tears in the eyes of some left behind, clutching children or hauling small backpacks. I tried to assure them another flight might come, but we all knew the risk. The ramp closed behind us. Through a narrow window, I glimpsed the undead pouring into the perimeter. The engines roared, the plane surged forward, leaving the ground and the waiting crowd below. My breath caught in my throat. We were airborne, but the cost was heartbreaking. Rattling high above the land, we watched city lights and fires below. Dr. Cho's crates were strapped securely. Colonel Davis sat near the cockpit, reviewing maps. The flight plan was to reach a private airstrip in the Midwest, hidden away from major population centers. No one had used it extensively since the outbreak began, so it might still be clear of hordes. Turbulence shook the aircraft, adding to the tension. In hushed voices, Dr. Cho's team discussed strategy, how to refine the immunotherapy into a more stable treatment. Jonas worried about generator power at whatever base we landed at. Sarah tried to stay composed, occasionally wiping tears, probably thinking of those left behind at the airfield. After a few hours, the plane began descending. As we peered out the window, darkness shrouded the landscape, broken only by starlight. The runway came into view, lit by a handful of mobile lamps. The landing gear groaned as we touched down. The plane taxied into an overgrown airstrip surrounded by farmland. Colonel Davis signaled that we'd arrived at the rumored fortress, an abandoned training camp turned stronghold. Stepping off the plane, we found a rural site dotted with low, functional buildings. Barbed wire fences encircled the perimeter, with guard towers at each corner. The distant horizon was farmland, rolling hills and woodlands. A sense of relief washed over us, no immediate sign of infected. This location seemed to have been spared the brunt of the undead surge, possibly due to its isolation. Colonel Davis introduced us to a handful of people overseeing the camp, a logistics officer, a few mechanics, and a small group of civilian specialists. They'd set up farmland plots, water purification systems, and a rudimentary lab space. Dr. Cho's eyes lit up at the sight of a half-decent lab area. It still lacked cutting-edge tools, but it was better than the makeshift conditions we'd been working under. We were assigned bunks in a simple barracks building. The group spread out, some preparing the lab, others checking supplies. I found a corner with a shortwave transmitter array, scanning frequencies for any sign that the second plane might have made another rescue flight. The lines were mostly static, though. The colonel said they'd try to organize more evacuations, but there was no guarantee. Fuel was limited, and the risk of losing the plane was high. With permission from camp leadership, I set up a small broadcast station in a converted storage room. Using the camp's generator and some salvaged equipment from the plane, I patched together a signal that might reach distant survivors. On air, I introduced myself. This is Morgan Ellsworth, broadcasting from a secure location in the Midwest. We have a functioning lab with partial immunotherapy for the hyper-evolved rabies outbreak. If you can hear this, know that there are pockets of resistance. We call on medical professionals, engineers, farmers, anyone with skills, to consider joining us if you can find safe passage. Remember that caution is paramount. The undead infection persists worldwide, carried by human and animal hosts. I repeated the message at intervals, switching frequencies to maximize coverage. Part of me felt hollow, recalling how many times I'd done something similar in New York and Baltimore, with fleeting success. Yet I had to keep trying. Perhaps a few more enclaves would connect, forming a greater network of survivors. Life at the camp was an odd mix of military discipline and civilian collaboration. We rose at dawn to handle chores like fetching water, gathering firewood, and tending small agricultural plots. Dr. Cho spent hours in the lab, refining her treatments. Jonas set up a stable power grid using spare generators. Sarah managed rosters of tasks, making sure everyone contributed evenly. Colonel Davis ran security drills, preparing for the possibility that roving hordes might eventually reach our farmland. A few refugees arrived on foot or by small vehicles, saying they heard our broadcast, We screened them carefully for bite marks or suspicious symptoms before letting them in. Most were traumatized by experiences on the road, describing run-ins with infected animals or half-collapsed towns overrun by the undead. Each new arrival brought both relief, more human connection, and concern, mouths to feed, possible risk of infection. One afternoon, the camp's perimeter guards reported an approaching figure. Through binoculars, we saw a single reanimated person stumbling across a field. Its clothing was tattered, face grimy with signs of decay. No telling how it ended up there, alone. Colonel Davis dispatched a small security team to handle it quietly. They used crossbows rather than rifles, to avoid drawing more attention. The undead was neutralized quickly, but the incident confirmed our fears. We weren't entirely off the undead radar. As the infection ravaged other areas, it was only a matter of time before larger groups might wander into our region. The colonel strengthened perimeter defenses, erecting more wire barriers and building watchtowers. We also scouted the surrounding farmland, removing any infected wildlife that might linger. Deer, raccoons, and even birds were potential carriers if the virus had mutated enough to jump further species lines. Dr. Cho's team made gradual improvements to the partial immunotherapy. Some lab animals infected artificially showed extended survival times and fewer symptoms. However, reanimation still occurred once they fully expired. The next step required specialized equipment for advanced genetic manipulation. We lacked that level of tech here. We also lacked a reliable method to confirm whether the virus could eventually be eradicated from an infected individual. Each success was tempered by the knowledge that no global solution existed yet. This apocalypse wouldn't reverse easily. We'd have to outlast the rotting hordes, develop treatments that could prevent new cases, and somehow keep large segments of the population uninfected. A daunting prospect. Word spread slowly that our camp was stable. A trickle of newcomers arrived weekly, forming a fledgling community. A former teacher started holding small classes for the children who made it. A carpenter built furniture and repaired the wooden outbuildings. A horticulturist began experimenting with greenhouse designs, hoping to expand our crop yield. Despite the apocalyptic setting, life found small ways to continue. Even so, we never forgot the threat outside. We held regular drills, tested our fences, and maintained a strict watch. Night patrols reported occasional sightings of stray undead on the horizon, but no massive horde yet. One morning, while scanning frequencies, we picked up a transmission from a settlement in the Rocky Mountains. They used a high-powered transmitter, describing a well-defended valley community. Karen Lowe's name surfaced. Apparently, she was working with them on wildlife disease control. I recognized that as the veterinarian who first tipped me off about the outbreak. They said she'd made progress developing a rabies antibody specifically tailored to forest animals, reducing their ability to spread infection. I felt a swell of hope that maybe the puzzle was gradually being solved by pockets of dedicated experts around the globe. Despite the relative safety of the camp, many of us wrestled with the mental residue of what we'd seen in New York, Baltimore, and beyond. I occasionally woke in the middle of the night, recalling the moans of undead or the sight of friends lost. Others admitted similar experiences, flashbacks of infected swarms, or the memory of family members left behind. We shared these stories quietly, sitting around lanterns in the barracks. It helped to unburden ourselves, even as it reminded us how fragile our existence remained. Colonel Davis found himself at the helm of a rapidly growing settlement. Balancing the needs of new arrivals with the limited resources caused friction. Some complained that the soldiers got better rations or more comfortable sleeping quarters. Others grumbled about the risk of bringing in outsiders who might secretly be infected. Davis tried to maintain fairness, but tensions simmered. Dr. Cho's lab was also a point of contention. Some residents believed too many resources went to research, claiming we should focus on immediate survival, like fortifying defenses or growing crops. In response, Dr. Cho organized weekly briefings to explain the lab's progress and emphasize the long-term benefits of a better immunotherapy. For many, it was a glimmer of hope worth investing in. One evening, watchtower guards heard a faint rumbling noise from the west. Through binoculars, they saw smoke rising. We speculated it might be an explosion or a massive vehicle crash. Over the radio, a small settlement in that direction frantically reported an onslaught of infected, perhaps thousands strong, overwhelming their defenses. Their final transmission ended abruptly. We braced for the possibility that the horde might drift toward us next. Colonel Davis increased nighttime patrols, posted extra spotters on high ground, and arranged a fallback plan in case the fences were compromised. The entire camp buzzed with nervous energy, reminiscent of the tension we felt in New York. In preparation, we expanded barricades, piling earthworks and digging shallow trenches around the main fence line. Wooden spikes angled outward to deter shambling hordes. The farmland outside the fence was partially abandoned, crops left to grow wild, as we couldn't risk venturing too far from the perimeter. Despite these efforts, we knew a colossal wave of the undead might still overrun us if they came in sufficient numbers. I used my broadcast time to urge unity among survivor settlements. Perhaps multiple communities working together could stand a better chance. Over the air, I repeated, "This is Morgan Ellsworth at the Midwestern Fortified Camp. We face a critical juncture. The hyper-evolved rabies infection has reshaped the world, but we are not defenseless. If your settlement has resources, knowledge, or manpower, consider joining forces. Alone, we risk being swept away. Together, we can build a future." In pockets around the globe, a few enclaves responded. A settlement in Canada described successful strategies for winter, as the cold seemingly slowed the undead. A group in Texas boasted an impressive perimeter with solar power. None of us had the perfect solution, but the seeds of a cooperative network were forming. As the camp solidified into a small town of survivors, a sense of cautious optimism emerged. Dr. Cho believed her team was weeks away from developing a more effective immunotherapy. If it worked, and if we could distribute it widely, humanity might begin to turn the tide. Still, no one underestimated the task ahead. The undead hordes covered vast swaths of land, and infected animals remained a stubborn vector in remote regions. I continued my role as a radio voice, weaving together news, survival tips, and calls for collaboration. Every broadcast carried the memory of the devastated cities I once knew. I imagined the skyline of Manhattan, now home to roving packs of undead in darkened streets. I pictured the abandoned studios of WNYC, the sub-basement bunker where we first tried to hold out. Perhaps, someday, we'd reclaim those places. Perhaps we'd let them stand as monuments to what we lost. Now, broadcasting from this fortress tucked deep in farmland, I'm more certain than ever. Civilization and collapse were never that far apart. A mutated rabies virus, passed between animals and humans, showed us just how quickly everything could fall apart. But it also revealed something deeper. That even in the heart of a zombie apocalypse, people still reached for one another. We still tried to save each other. We still built something out of the ruins. There are moments I can't stop replaying. Times Square, fading into darkness, lit only by the glow of fire. Fort Hamilton, once a beacon, then swallowed by the second wave. Baltimore, where a handful of brave defenders gave us just enough time to escape. The airfield, where we lifted off, knowing not everyone could come with us. And Colonel Davis, standing firm in these fields, determined to carve out one last stronghold. Those memories keep me grounded. They remind me we made it through. And if you're hearing this, you did too. Maybe you're watching the tree line from a cabin in the mountains. Maybe you're drifting across open water, searching for a clean coast. Or maybe you're hiding out in some high-rise, praying the horde moves on. Wherever you are, you're still here, and that matters. In conclusion, let this account serve as both testimony and warning. The hyper-evolved rabies outbreak that triggered this global zombie apocalypse has no quick fix. The hordes roam, unstoppable in their relentless shuffle. Government structures collapsed under the weight of panic and widespread infection. Yet humanity persists. We adapt. We forge alliances. We develop new treatments. If you're out there, know that you're not alone. Our fortress stands, battered but not beaten. Dr. Cho's lab perseveres. We hold on to hope that one day the undead will dwindle and a reclaimed world can emerge from the ashes of the old. Until then, we stay vigilant. We protect each other, and we refuse to yield. This is Morgan Ellsworth, signing off from our broadcast station in the Midwestern fortified camp. Wherever you are, hold fast. In the creeping darkness of this rotting infection, the spark of life remains. We are the living, and we will not surrender our claim to this earth. Stay safe, stay sharp, and if ever you hear our frequency, reach out. Together we stand a chance. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.